You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show, the show with simple, practical, and fun ideas to help you grow food at home, whether it's on a balcony, in a backyard, or bigger. I'm your host, Stephen Biggs. Welcome to Season 9, Episode 22. Wild food is often talked about as something people once gathered out of necessity. But Robin Henderson takes a different view. He calls it gastronomic foraging. Gathering wild plants not simply to fill the stomach, but because they can bring interesting flavors to the table. The Neighborhood Forager, a guide for the Wild Food Gourmet, is by Robin Henderson, listed as Robert K. Henderson on the cover. I recently included it in my list of Canadian gardening books that I posted on foodgardenlife.com, and that reminded me of this conversation from 2020 when my daughter Emma joined me as co-host. We talk about finding edible plants close to home, the family stories that sparked Robin's interest in foraging, and we also talk about what can be gathered even in the winter. Along the way, there's Elderflower champagne, Sumac lemonade, Spruce beer, Sorrel paste, dandelion-root coffee, and a surprisingly complimentary description of lamb's quarters. Now, here's our conversation with Robin Henderson.
Hey Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, we're so glad to have you on today, and we wanted to start by asking how you got into foraging.
Well, I got into foraging sort of just naturally. In the first place, I was raised in a settler family, and so there was a lot of talk when I was a kid about the things that my family had eaten when they first came west, and so that sort of gave me the notion that you could do this. Of course, by the time that I came along, the family wasn't doing any of those things anymore. It was more of the discussion was more of about how strange life had been for our forebears. But there was that, and I've always been really interested in the notion of self-sufficiency. So that was kind of fun. It also needs to be said that having been born in the early 60s and raised to the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of interest in that sort of thing in the world in those days. My great hero Yule Gibbons reached his glory days in the late 60s and the 70s, and so if you put all these things together, the fact that I was living in a fairly oftentimes in a fairly rural area, and the family memory of living off the land, and the fact that it was much in the air in those days, it just made me a forager without my really realizing it.
And you said that you grew up in rural areas, so how did that take you into urban or suburban or neighborhood foraging?
Well, it's funny you should ask. As a Westerner, I can tell you that I grew up in a rural area, and I ended up in a very suburban turning urban area, and I had not moved. So,
Okay.
That's the answer to that question right there. Also, I have to say that suburban/urban foraging is great fun. There are a lot of resources in that environment that you simply don't find in rural areas because of all the introduced plants, the ornamentals that are often have edible parts and that sort of thing. As I found myself increasingly surrounded by pavement and lawns, I was also learning that a lot of these new plants that were showing up and like flowers and whatnot, they're also edible, which for me was very intriguing. And as odd as polite society finds foraging at all, it really finds it odd when you're eating their ornamentals.
Yes.
So that was very 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 interesting for me.
Well, that brings up something that I've been wondering about, and you talk about how your family, being a settler family, was foraging, and so maybe more from a, I don't know if you'd call it subsistence standpoint, but the subtitle of your book is A Guide for the Wild Food Gourmet. So that sounds more gastronomic. Do you want to dig into that a little bit and talk about that?
Yeah, there's essentially there are two schools of foraging, and the one that tends to get the most media is survival foraging because it's very dramatic. It's often associated with the military or with people in danger, and so it makes a good story. And survival foraging is a whole skill of its own. It's obviously a crucial skill, but it's usually involved with filling your stomach and staying alive. And that's the reward you get for it. And as a result, you're often eating things that don't taste very good, things you wouldn't elect to eat unless you were forced to. And in some cases, you're eating things that aren't terribly even available to people that aren't, say, that haven't survived a plane crash in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So survival foraging tends to be very, very utilitarian, whereas gastronomic foraging is something you do because you like to eat food. You like to eat a variety of food. And one of the ways to get variety is to go out and find what's growing around you. And sort of the charge is in eating things that other people see around them all the time and they don't know are edible and don't realize are delicious.
Okay. So eating a lot of the ornamental plants that people, or weeds, I guess, that people have growing in their urban areas.
Yeah, and the weeds, for example. Just those plants that we see around us all the time. We're walking past edible plants. As I say, they're nutritious. They're often quite delicious, and they're right in front of you, and you just probably didn't know that unless you knew that.
Okay. And for people who are interested in this idea, what are some recommendations that you have for people who want to get into urban or suburban foraging?
Well, the first rule that we all say, whether we're gastronomic foragers or survival foragers, the bottom line is make sure you know what you're eating. The risk can be overstated. There really aren't that many things out there that will severely mess you up. There are a lot of things out there that'll make you wish you were dead for a short period. They'll make you miserable. You'll be nauseous. You'll get a headache, whatnot. But things that'll actually kill you are not that common, but they're out there, and it's important that you know what's edible, what's not edible, and under what circumstances things are edible, because there are plenty of edible plants in the world, wild and domestic, that are delicious in some contexts and poisonous in others. My favorite example are all of the nightshade vegetables that we grow in great quantity: tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant. They all have delicious edible parts, and the rest of the plant is deadly. And the same thing is true of some wild plants. So that's another thing you have to know. Now that you know that this given plant is edible, how is it edible? When is it edible? What part is edible? So I would say that that's the first thing you really need to be considered. You really need to be considering is getting a good guidebook, ideally several good guidebooks. These days, the internet is a wonderful resource too, and learning up top how to identify your edible plants, and you really should invest some time in recognizing the ones that are decidedly not edible too.
Okay. That makes me think of a comment I heard a mushroomer make to me once, that you can eat any mushroom once. Just
right.
You might not be able to come back for a second time if you get it wrong.
That's right. There's another mushroomer saying that I've always appreciated. It says the difference between a toadstool and a mushroom is that toadstools will kill you. You'll know it's a toadstool if it kills you. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm a big mushroomer myself. Mushrooms are not in the book, but I love mushrooming. That's another thing that I'm really into.
We've just been out morelling over the past couple of weeks and absolutely loving it. It's a favorite activity. I think as much as we like the mushrooms too, there's the whole business of getting out into the woods and really focusing and looking so closely. It's deeply calming for us.
It's like an Easter egg hunt. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It really is.
And for people who want to get started, what are some of the best places that they should look to start?
Quite honestly, everywhere. The plants are all around you. They're in your yard. They're going through the cracks in your driveway. They're in parks. They're everywhere. The only cautionary note, well, maybe two cautionary notes that I might give is one. Obviously, you're going to have property lines to deal with, so you want to be obviously careful about harvesting, foraging on other people's land when they might not appreciate that. That's a possibility. And the other thing too is that there's often a certain amount of toxic filth in residential areas. So I caution people to use their common sense. Generally, foraging alongside a heavily trafficked road is kind of not indicated. And again, generally you can stand there and ask yourself, does this look like an appetizing place? If the answer is no, then that's probably not where you want to be foraging. But aside from that, really just cultivate an awareness of the plants that are around you. I find that as a forager, I've just become a generalized botanist, period. Whether the plants are edible or not edible, I tend to know what they are and some basics about their history and that sort of thing. Just because in the pursuit of edible plants, I've had to learn about all plants, and as a result, I feel much more comfortable in the environment, in the context, because I'm familiar with the things that are around me.
That's a great point. Yeah, and so you can rule things out and figure out what is edible and what is not edible because you have more of that background.
Yeah, and you can just identify things. I mean, it's astonishing that the plants that we call weeds, the great majority of people can't even give you a common name for most of the weeds that they've seen all of their lives. And eventually, as you learn these things, you learn the common names, you learn the binomials, and 9 times out of 10, you find out that it's edible or otherwise useful, because a lot of the weeds that came, for example, to North America, they are exotics. They were imported one way or the other from other continents to here, and many, many times they were imported on purpose. So you find out, well, why did the original settlers from Asia and Europe, why did they bring these here? And it turns out, well, they have uses. And as often as not, those uses are comestible. They're edible plants that were so valued back where they came from that people imported them into their gardens, whence they escaped, and have now become a bit of a plague on the landscape. But we can help with that problem by eating them.
I wonder if we could just talk about a couple of weeds that are edible that you find a lot of people haven't realized are edible. Are there a couple examples you can share?
Yeah, well, whenever the subject turns to edible weeds, the first thing you're going to hear about is the dandelion. I think a lot of people do know that that's a highly edible plant, but it's worth mentioning again. The dandelions are very generous in terms of their edibility. Just virtually every part of the plant is edible at some time of year in some way. The only part of the plant that is not edible is the stem. Everything else, the leaves, the roots, the flowers, are all edible and delicious when eaten at the right time, and highly nutritious too. The reason why dandelions have showed up in North America, we do have 2 native dandelions here, but most of the dandelions that we find have arrived from Europe. And the reason they came is because you could live on them. And the early settlers from other continents had starvation problems. And so between that and the medicinal properties that they were thought to have, that earned their right on the ship. But plantain, for example, is another one. It's much less commonly recognizable. This is a plant that, if I were to show it to you, you would instantly recognize it. Any of your listeners who don't know what I'm talking about when I say plantain, so just look it up on the internet, and the first photo that you see, you'll say, oh, yeah, that. Well, that's here because of its documented medical uses. It's still used in medicine today, and because you can eat it as a pot herb, and it's everywhere. In fact, plantain is so common, was so associated with white settlers that the First Nations peoples called it white man's footprints.
Ah.
Because wherever we showed up, so did plantain.
Wow.
Neat.
And with the dandelion, I'm jumping back to that one, Robin. I
Sure.
made a coffee substitute out of the roots once, which reminded me very much of a camp coffee liquid that my grandmother used to feed me, and she told me in the UK that's what they used to get. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with dandelion-root coffee. I basically don't like coffee. I'm a tea guy,
Mm-hmm.
and many years ago when I was living in Quebec, my wife was a coffee drinker, and as you know, because you've made the stuff, it is fairly labor intensive to make dandelion coffee. So anyway, I made. She particularly liked dandelion coffee. I made it for her, and she liked it. So I made a great big batch of it, or anyway, I put aside. I pulled, cleaned, cut, and dried. I don't know how many dandelion roots. Lots. It was lots of work. And sadly, the relationship ended before she was able to drink it, and I was stuck with this metric ton of coffee stock, and asking myself, what am I going to do with this? I was sure as heck wasn't going to throw it on a compost heap after all that work. So I said, well, I'm going to drink it. I'm just Scottish enough that if you put that much work into something, even if you don't like it, you better drink it. So I did, and over the winter, I kind of tweaked my recipe here and there. Over the winter, I got so that not only could I drink it, but I really enjoyed it. And now that's become one of my favorite drinks in the world. It's still the only coffee I can stand to drink.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. And so what did you tweak in the recipe then?
Well, you start with the basic roots. They got to be dug, cleaned, split, cut, dried, and finally roasted. You should roast them just before you make the coffee, like no more than a month in advance, because like coffee beans, they get bland.
Okay.
But what I do is the other thing is if you store it in the freezer, if you store the roasted roots in the freezer, that also helps preserve their potency. Anyway, so I take the ground roasted roots. The roots are roasted until they're dark chocolate brown. A wonderful smell fills the house while you're doing this. You put it in the oven, roast it at about 300 degrees more or less until they're just this dark chocolate brown. Then you grind them up. And to that, I add just the smallest pinch of ground cloves. I always say if you can taste them, it's too much.
Okay.
It's just enough in there. It just gives it a certain mouth. And then I add a little bit more than that of ground roast juniper berries.
Ah.
And then I prick that up as coffee. I put just enough honey in it to get it past my tongue, and a little milk. And my goodness, on a winter day, back home in Quebec, I'd go snowshoeing all day long. Fortunately, I was living in a place where I could put my rackets on and go straight out into the woods and spend all day, and then come right back through my own back door.
Mm-hmm.
And I have such pleasant memories of, about 4 p.m. after a long day of shoeing, and having a nice hot cup of that dandelion coffee. Oh, it was wonderful.
That's sounding
Wow.
very good.
So
One other thing I should say about dandelion coffee before I leave the subject, it is important that if you're going to make it, that you dig the roots in the autumn, shortly before the leaves die, basically shortly before the snow comes in our country, because if you harvest them too soon in the year, they won't be bitter. And normally that's a good thing, but when it comes to coffee, bitterness is part of its character. And I have made the mistake of making dandelion coffee from dandelions that were too young. And as I mentioned, it is fairly labor intensive, and to get the disappointing results is discouraging.
Okay, so make it in the fall then, once those roots are plump and they have that bitterness.
Yeah, the plant gets more and more bitter the longer it lives, which is also why the best time to eat the greens, for example, is in the spring as soon as they come up, because those greens will be bitter in the fall. but in the spring they're quite tasty because they haven't developed that bitterness yet.
Okay. So dandelions are definitely quite widely available. Are there any other crops that come to mind as being found all over, just like the dandelion?
Well, I mean, there are so many. We could be here for months. The mustard family is the mustard family of weeds is another real common pot herb that you see all over the place. Field mustard, it's called hedge mustard. You do have to be careful because those are common names, and there are plants out there that are called mustard that aren't from the mustard family, and some of them are not good for you, and others just don't taste good. So if somebody identifies something to you as mustard, look it up, make sure that it is that. But another family are the Chenopodium family. This is the family that quinoa comes from. The grain comes from the Chenopodium family. But growing in our ditches and in our fields are such plants as lamb's quarters, for example.
Okay.
And you can find fields, especially disturbed soil where they've plowed the soil or bulldozed it or whatnot, and there'll be just solid fields of this of lamb's quarters and goosefoot. Those are both Chenopodium species, and they are delicious greens. You just snip off the stem when they're young and steam them like spinach. They look a lot like spinach, but they taste a lot better than spinach, and I love spinach. But they're just really, really good. Those are two other examples. As I say, I could go on forever.
Yeah, we have lots of lamb's quarters around here, and we eat it like spinach as well. It's so good.
It's delicious. It's just it has a different mouth from spinach. Even homegrown spinach doesn't have that velvety kind of sustaining feel in your mouth.
That's the word I've been looking for a long time, velvety, to describe that. Yeah. When we were emailing back and forth prior to this podcast, you'd said, let's talk about hard winter foraging. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, hard winter foraging is the sort of thing that for us Canadians is kind of a handy thing to know because hard winter is sort of our middle name, unless we're from BC. But and actually most of BC is hard winter country. It's just that little corner down the bottom that isn't. But when I was living in Quebec, particularly, that was my first experience with a hard winter environment. And sure enough, December comes and that white curtain comes slamming down, and it sure looks like you're done foraging until May. So I mentioned earlier that I used to do a lot of snowshoeing back there in Quebec, and I thought, well, I'm just going to do my best to see what I can find that might be out here that might be edible. And it's a classic bad news, good news scenario. The bad news is that sure enough, there ain't much. The good news is there are some really wonderful things you can find out there. And my favorite example are squash berries, which are all but inaccessible any winter or any season except hard winter. And squash berries are a viburnum fruit. They grow on a tall bush. The bush can be up to like 10 feet tall. They're bright red berries, and they're usually growing very near the edge of water, particularly beaver ponds, kind of swampy area that tends to be rather tangled, which is the reason why it's kind of difficult to get to it. And in the wintertime, I used to go snowshoeing over the many, many beaver ponds that were near where I lived, and you'd see these bright berries that had just been frozen solid right on the bush. Why the birds had never eaten those when they were fresh, I don't know, but for some reason they don't. They're extremely edible. They taste something like cranberries, but not as bitter. Some people call them high bush cranberries. Okay. And it's wintertime. I'm on my snowshoes. The vegetation's all dead anyway, and the undergrowth is 3 feet under me because I'm on the snow. And I could just walk up to bush after bush and snap off those little berry umbels and fill bags and bags and bags with them. I bring them home and make sauces and jellies. And I always wanted to attempt wine, but I never got around to it. I hope somebody listening gives that a shot, because it certainly seems to me that they would be good. But those berries are frozen solid out there, just like you pick them in the summertime, bag them up and put them in the freezer to make jam out of later. It's exactly the same thing. And you just kind of shake them back and forth in the sack, and all the berries fall off, and you've got jam stock.
Wow. And so I was going to say jam and sauces, I guess. Are there other uses that you found for them too?
Well, any fruit, really any vegetable material can be used to make wine. I don't know if you're familiar with the English winemaking culture, but the English farmers will make wine out of literally any organic substance, including beef.
Beef.
You know. Now, I'm not that accomplished, but I do enjoy experimenting with wines made of foraged material.
Well, I did find a British book once that had a parsnip wine, and I made that, and it was quite disgusting.
Really?
I suspect up there with the beef wine, but I could see the squashberry wine. I'm picturing something with a beautiful color as you describe those berries.
Yeah, well, the thing I should, since we brought up the topic, the thing I should say about the English winemaking culture is that I think it's very much like Scottish cuisine, which is that the whole trick is to make it taste like something other than it is. You know, Scottish cuisine is like that too. If you look at the recipe, you'll never go near it. But a good cook knows how to take that stuff and make it delicious. And you mentioned parsnip wine. What I've read of the English winemaking culture, and it's fairly copious because I've always been fascinated by it. Those farmers, they have ways of manipulating the stuff that they're using that bring it out in such a way that if you were to taste it, you wouldn't even be able to guess what it's made of. That and the fact that some of the wines that the English farmers make are also intended to be used either as medicine or in cooking. That's another thing. Things like onion wine. They make onion wine. You wouldn't want to sit down to a glass of that.
Okay.
That's made for cooking. But anyway.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so on the subject of alcoholic things, the Elderflower champagne that's in your book is something that I absolutely love. And
we're coming up on that season real fast.
It's coming up close. And we moved a few years ago, and I've since been trying to reestablish my elderberry patch. But I think this year we're going out in search of it so I can do that recipe again. Are there other recipes, favorite recipes of yours from the book that you could share with us?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, we talked a little bit about alcoholic beverages before. I shared there's a beer recipe, a Spruce beer recipe that I got when I lived in Quebec. It's based on, my recipe is based on an ancient one I found from the 1700s, Quebecois farmer beer. It's Spruce beer, and that's a good one. I like it. It's a really dark beer. I mean, it's one of those beers that if you drop the bottle and the bottle breaks, the beer doesn't spill. You know, it's a serious drink. When I was married, I would drink a bottle of my beer in the wintertime, and I'd always tell her, my respect for your people grows. She was Quebecoise.
Okay.
My respect for your people grows every time I taste this beer, because first off, it was delicious, and my recipe has been tweaked quite a bit. You know, I adjusted it until it was just right for me, but it tastes good. It's a really nice experience to drink, but man, oh man, is it strong. I bottled it in tiny little, like 3/4 size bottles, and even that was enough for me. I mean, I after one bottle of that with dinner, I was done for the night. I wasn't having any more. And when I think of those old Quebecois farmers at 40 below in the wintertime living on that stuff, wow. That tells you who those people are.
Yeah. So Spruce beer, and then Sumac lemonade is another thing that you share in there too, I believe.
Oh, that's another delicious one. That's a good one to know. Yeah, Sumac lemonade. The Sumac cones, they're called. They're those velvety kind of deer antler looking red flowers that sumac sets in the late summer. And sumac is very, very tart. So I talk about how to do this in my book in some detail. Essentially, you run those cones through the blender, and you strain them off. So you get this very purple, highly colored liquid that looks for all the world like Burgundy wine, but it has it's incredibly tart. And for anything that you would ever use lemon juice for, sumac juice makes it much better. And sumac lemonade on a summer day, oh my goodness. And the thing is, the color of it is so lively that you'd swear it was something you bought in the supermarket that was full of artificial color. It looks like the sort of thing that we give children to eat. They're like neon under black lights kind of stuff.
Wow.
But it's not. It's perfectly natural, and is just incredibly delicious. Once you've had it, lemonade will never do again.
Well, we're gonna have to give that a try, and we should
It's so
mention.
easy to do too. That's the amazing thing. It grows all around us. This is what I was talking about earlier. It grows all around us. We see it all the time,
Yeah,
and it's easily prepared, very quick and easy to prepare. Do you have guests over on the summer to sit on your patio? Patio season,
yeah.
and you give them this nice iced down sumac lemonade. Man, oh man, they will be blown away. I've done it. It's amazing.
And you give them the sumac lemonade before the spruce beer, presumably.
Yes. Well, the spruce beer is, of course, a winter drink.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, now that you mention it, I think the seasons are elderberry champagne, sumac lemonade, and spruce beer. Those are the seasons.
Okay.
And we should mention to our listeners, too, that your book, The Neighborhood Forager, has over 30 different recipes for when they're out foraging, too. So they should definitely check that out. And before we wrap up, we wanted to know what you've been foraging recently in the last few days and what's coming up soon.
Well, just a couple of nights ago, I ran across an awesome patch of sorrel. Sorrel's another one of those weeds that's everywhere. You see it all the time. You've seen it all your life. School children tend to know this one. They call it sour grass. It's a weed you pick and you chew, and it's very, very tart.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, generally the leaves of sorrel are very kind of short. It's a plant that adores bad soil, so it's not usually very generous. But every so often there'll be some little change in the soil chemistry, and you'll get these big, beautiful leaves of sorrel. And I ran into such a patch, and I threw it in a salad because it's really nice in salad. It's got this tartness. I made a sauce out of it by grinding it with a little bit of salt in a pestle, and you make sort of a paste is what it is, a paste of sorrel and just a little bit of salt, and that's really good on fish. So I had some on fried fish, and I threw it in into some other dishes right now that aren't quite coming to mind. I think I floated it on some soup. Yeah, I floated it on some soup. If you've got enough of it, you can make soup out of sorrel by just steaming it, adding a little milk, and running it through the blender. But anyway, that was my most recent foraging adventure. Once you get to know these plants and you know them on site and whatnot, they're just around you all the time. Mm-hmm. So I'm always bending over and picking something, for dinner tonight. Just always happens.
Wow. Well, Robin, thank you so much for telling us all about neighborhood foraging. And I think a lot of people will be really inspired as they hear some of these ideas.
Well, I hope so. It's a really fun hobby.
It's been great talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show. I'm Stephen Biggs.